I had just poured my coffee when I heard tires crunching on the gravel outside. Before I could reach the door, my son Leonard walked in, followed by his wife, Marissa, and my 2 grandkids. 6 suitcases landed in the middle of my sitting room. Like they owned the floor, Marissa didn't say hello. You'll be moving downstairs. The upstairs is ours now. I smiled not because of what she said, but because I already knew what they were after. And if they'd known what I'd prepared for this day, they might never have stepped through my door. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You can comment where you're watching from. They didn't notice the way I kept my hands steady as I set my coffee cup down on the old oak table. 78 years of living teach you how to keep your face still, how to hold air in your chest when someone tries to take it from you. Leonard was already heading up the stairs like he'd bought them, brushing past the grandfather clock I'd inherited from my father. Marissa lingered just long enough to give the room a slow, appraising look, the kind you give a rental before you send the contractor round. Then she followed. Emily, my granddaughter, offered a small, uncertain smile, the kind you give someone you like but aren't sure how to approach. Nathan didn't even look up from his phone. "Nice to see you too," I murmured, but nobody heard me. Upstairs, drawers began opening and closing. I took a sip of coffee, letting the bitter warmth remind me where I was. In the old days, when my wife Margaret was alive, this house had never felt invaded. Even surprise visits were welcome. They were noisy, they were ours. We'd bought this place in the late 80s, a tired 2-story on the edge of Ashdown Lake in Kent. Paint peeling, roof groaning in storms. It took years of work and arguments and laughter to make it into the home we loved. Now I listened to my son move through it like a contractor assessing a property he'd just acquired. And safety felt like a relic. "Leonard," I called, keeping my tone even. "What's going on?" Voice came down from above. "Told you, Dad. We're having the house worked on, needed a place to stay for a few weeks." "I don't recall you telling me that." "You must have forgotten," he said, a thread of impatience under the casual tone. Marissa appeared at the landing. "We'll be out of your hair before you know it." "That's fine," I said, "but the upstairs bedroom is Dad." Leonard cut in. He started down the stairs as if to demonstrate them. "Stairs aren't good for you. This way you've got the bathroom right there. No risk of falling." I met his eyes and saw the rehearsed, look like a salesman delivering a well-practiced line. "I've managed those stairs for 30 years, I said. Marissa smiled without warmth. "And we'd like to keep it that way. Let us help." Some arguments cost more than silence. I turned towards the small room off the sitting room, the one that had been a guest room for as long as I could remember. Single bed, small dresser, no wardrobe. More a storage nook than a bedroom. Now apparently it was mine by mid-afternoon. Their presence was everywhere. Leonard's duffel bag hunched on the sofa. Marissa had draped a scarf over the armchair where Margaret used to read. My coffee table now hosted an arrangement of scented candles that smelled faintly of lavender and chemicals. I caught Marissa in the kitchen peering into my fridge. "This milk expired yesterday," she said, holding it up like evidence. "I drink it with my coffee," I replied. "Leonard, pick up almond milk later." She called over her shoulder. "I've lived this long without almond milk," I muttered. "Well, we'll just make a few small changes," she said. That same thin smile like tracing paper. I stepped out onto the deck to breathe. The lake rippled under a pale sun.
Oh.
2 geese drifted near the reeds. Out here, the air was clean, untouched by the sense of rearrangement creeping through the house. Helping family wasn't the problem. God knows I'd done my share for Leonard college tuition. His first car, a top-up on the deposit, stood behind his mortgage when the market did its great sulk. I never kept score. This was different. This wasn't asking, it was assuming. Assumptions are the first stones in a wall built around you. When I came back in, Emily was in the kitchen alone, pouring a glass of water. Double quotes, "Hi, Grandpa," she said. "Hi, love. You doing all right?" She shrugged. "Yeah, Uni is." "A lot you'll manage," I said. "How long are you all staying?" "They said a month," she said, eyes on the glass. "But I don't know." Nathan breezed past, sniffing. "It smells weird in here." "That'll be your phone melting," I said, but he'd already left in the evening. They gathered around my table like proprietors humoring a tenant. Marissa set bowls on the placemats Margaret had stitched, her nails clicking against porcelain. Leonard said grace, as if he remembered how. "Dad," he began, as we ate, fork raised like a conductor. "Marissa's mom and dad will pop by tomorrow. You know, help with the kids? They'll probably stay a few nights." "Will they?" I said. Neutral as rain. "They've been so supportive," Marissa put in. "It'll be good to have them close." "See," I said, because I did. I saw a plan dressed as care. I saw a woman who had never paid a mortgage in her life, plan to rearrange someone else's. I slept badly in the downstairs bed. The house sounded wrong from that angle. In the morning, found a list on the kitchen counter written in a handwriting that thought it was a chalkboard. Almond milk, oats, cereal, candles, linen, bath mat, new kettle. I put the list in the bin. At 10 o'clock the next day, Marissa's parents arrived with bags and voices. Trevor and Belinda. They were a matched, set tasteful jumpers. Shoes that had never met a field. Faces that had practiced the polite smile you use for a waiter. Belinda looked round my kitchen like it was an exhibit. "Isn't it, darling?" she said to Marissa. "As if I wasn't there. We'll make it so cozy." Trevor thumped my shoulder. "All right, old chap. We're just in for a few days while the kids sort themselves out." "Of course," I said. "Make yourself comfortable in my house." Didn't hear me. People seldom do when they are busy measuring where to put themselves. They had a few people over that evening. Just a handful, Marissa promised, which turned into a dozen. Her parents made calls. Marissa arranged cushions. Leonard lit candles, and by 7, the deck had become a stage with a view, voices well-oiled with wine. A Bluetooth speaker appeared and learned its job badly. Emily stayed close to the kitchen doorway. Nathan made himself scarce with a boy's talent for slipping through rooms like a draft. Neighbors are patient up to a point. Moira from next door texted, "New lot?" I replied, "Temporary, keep an eye." She sent back a thumbs up in 3 words, "Rope at hand," which is her way of saying, "Don't make me bring the neighborhood watch." Meeting forward, at 9:30, Marissa stood and tapped her glass with a spoon like an actress cheating applause. "To family," she said, "to new beginnings." Belinda dabbed her eyes with a napkin for show. I let them have their lines. I washed my mug. I wiped the worktop. I switched off to lamps that didn't need to labor. Then I put on my jacket and walked out across the lawn to the gate, where a silver Skoda idled with its lights off. The passenger window slid down. "Evening, Mr. Vale," said a familiar voice. "Looks lively." "Evening, Miss Sethi," I said. "You look like a woman who enjoys taking the wind out of a room." Priya Sethi, solicitor, arrived at my call 10 minutes early because she knows how to make an entrance without theater, by being the first adult in a scene. She had represented me when Margaret died, when we tidied the will and the title, when I did a thing sensible old men do if they have seen a few winters. I put the house into a life interest trust. I had settled 9 Ashdown Bank on the Margaret Vale Trust, a small, charitable arrangement with St. Catherine's Hospice as the remainder man, with a life tenancy reserved for my exclusive occupation, exclusive control, no one else to reside without my written permission. We'd lodged the RX-1 at the land registry in a forma restriction. My name still glowed on the post. The title whispered a different truth. This house belonged to a promise, not an appetite. Priya switched off the engine. "Are we ready to be boring and legal?" "I've been rehearsing for 20 years. I said, "What's in the folder?" She patted a lever arch as tenderly as some women pat dogs. "An interim injunction obtained at 4 o'clock this afternoon under CPR 25. Restraining Leonard Vale and Marissa Vale, and persons unknown, from intimidating, harassing, or excluding the claimant, one George Vale, from his sole use and occupation of 9 Ashdown Bank. A possession order against any persons in occupation without license. A notice to quit issued under the trust deed. A covering letter to be served. Copies to the local police to prevent breach of the peace." She smiled without humor. "A spare copy for Belinda, because she strikes me as the sort who reads the back page to see if she wins." "Who's the someone they don't expect?" I asked. She nodded towards the second car pulling in behind her a Navy estate with a woman. In a St. Catherine's hospice fleece, stepping out, neat hair, calm eyes. That, Priya said, is Hannah Black, head of estates for the hospice. She has a copy of the title register and the trust deed. She is, for practical purposes, your landlord. Out? My smile widened. They thought they were moving in with family. It'll do them good to meet Charity. Just to be clear, Priya said, lawyerly, even when she was enjoying herself, we are not evicting your son. We are requiring unlicensed persons to leave and serving notice that no further occupancy will be tolerated. You will decide what to do about Leonard after he has learned to speak to you without the voice of a brochure. We walked up the path. Together me, my solicitor, and the woman they would not expect. I opened my own door. Sound hit us first. Laughter slippery with wine. Some poor 70s track becoming a crime. Belinda's voice rose above the rest. It's the perfect. Canvas Marissa saw us and swayed half a step, glass lifting instinctively to greet a donor. Oh, she said, managing a hostess smile. We weren't expecting quite, I said. This is Priya, my solicitor. And this is Hannah from St. Catherine's Hospice. Belinda blinked. I'm sorry. Hannah's tone was that of someone who had spoken to 100 families about wills and pain and had learned how to be kind without being fragile. Good evening, I'm head of estates. I'm here under the trust arrangements for Mr. Vale's property. Maurice's smile thinned. George, we've discussed we have it, I said. I would have remembered. Leonard appeared from the kitchen, hands up as though calming a horse. Dad, he began with his reasonable voice. We can talk about this tomorrow. We've got people. Priya opened the folder like a magician's final reveal. Papers never looked so good. Interim injunction, she said, handing him the top copy. Granted this afternoon by District Judge R. at the county court. It restrains you and your wife, by name and persons unknown, from excluding or attempting to exclude Mr. Vale from his home, harassing him, interfering with his quiet enjoyment, or introducing additional occupiers without his express written consent. We'll be polite about it. We also brought a locksmith. She smiled, courteous and savage. But I rather hope we won't need him. Belinda laughed, strong reaction for a woman whose weight relied on other people's chairs. You can't. Be serious, she said, and took the pages as if paper were optional. Hannah placed the copy of the title register on the coffee table between the scented candles. The official crest looked very fine next to lavender. This house is held on trust, she said, settled by Mr. Vale 15 years ago. He has a life interest exclusive right of occupation. On his death, it will pass to St. Catherine's Hospice to support end-of-life care for patients in West Kent and East Sussex. She looked at Leonard with a gentleness that was harder than steel. It is not yours to occupy. It is not yours to plan. Leonard read more slowly than I'd taught him to. He looked from the paper to me as if the words had teeth. What is this? You put the house in a charity? Just why? Would you? Because your mother and I were sentimental, I said. And because we liked the idea of our bricks being useful beyond our name. You are my son. You have never needed my house. You do not need it now. I kept my voice low. You need my respect. That will require some work. Maurice's chin came up. We're family, she said. You can't just throw family out of their home. You're not being thrown out of your home, Priya said evenly. You are being asked to leave a property you do not own and were not invited to occupy. With people you were not entitled to install during a party you did not ask to host, we will give you 10 minutes to ask your guests to leave. Then we will call the police to prevent a breach of the peace while people do the right thing. Trevor spoke for the first time, finally realizing that he had failed to read the room. This is ridiculous, he blustered.
I know my rights.
Splendid, Priya said, so you'll respect mine. There is a moment in every farce where the air changes the bit, where the audience decides whether to forgive the clown or call security. The neighbors were already at their kitchen windows, pretending not to be there. The music became embarrassed and turned itself down. Emily had drifted in and stood by the doorframe, eyes wide, not with fear, but with a species of relief I recognized. Nathan appeared on the stairs with his phone at his chest like a sentenced man. Leonard tried the old joke, "Dad, come on." "This is over the top." "Over the top was the list in my kitchen," I said. "Over the top was the insistence I sleep downstairs because you'd decided the view was yours. This is tidy." He saw it then. The way stubborn men do when the facts are not new, but finally allowed to sit down. "How long?" he asked. "Not about the night, but the paperwork that had made his face pale." 15 years, I said. He swallowed. "So you never planned to?" "I planned to let you be my son," I said. "Not my landlord." It took 25 minutes. Parties unravel faster than they begin. The Bluetooth speaker learned about the off button. Coats were found. Laughter downgraded itself to silence. A hired bar staffer clocked the change and began to tidy in the way of a professional who has seen this before. Priya stood by the front door and collected names politely. Hannah remained on the sofa like a queen in exile, not moving because she didn't need to. Linda attempted a speech about dignity. The room ignored her. Trevor managed to walk into my grandfather clock and apologized to it. Marissa waited until the last guest had left. "We'll go to my parents for the night," she said tightly. "We'll sort this in the morning. You'll go to your parents for the foreseeable," Priya said. "Everything we need to sort will be sorted through solicitors." Lingered, his face finally stripped of all the brochures he'd been taught to wear. "Emily," he said, without looking at me, "pack a bag." He didn't tell her where they were going. She joined me in the kitchen with a small overnight rucksack and eyes that had learned too much. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I'm sorry. They didn't tell me. You didn't do anything wrong," I said. "You made a glass of water." She gave a short, helpless laugh that sounded exactly like the one Margaret used to make when life forgot to be kind. "Can I stay, just tonight?" I looked at Priya. She nodded once. "You are his guest," she said to Emily. "Everyone else will wait for paperwork." Leonard saw the bag and read the room well enough to understand. This wasn't the hill to die on. "Fine," he said. "We'll be back tomorrow." "No," Priya said, almost kindly. "You'll be contacted tomorrow." They left into Tripstrever and Belinda first. Then Marissa with a suitcase thudding each stair as she dragged it like a sulk. Leonard stood with his hand on the door, face to mine. I could see the boy he had been behind the man who had tried to be something else. "Dad," he said. "Last try." "Son," I said. No, the door closed. The house exhaled the way houses do when they know you've remembered them properly. We did not toast. Priya put away the documents as if tucking a child in. Hannah stood. "Mr. Vale," she said, "for what it's worth, I wish all our jobs were this tidy. Life interest trusts are not always used to protect the living. People remember us only when they die. It's a pleasure to support someone who understood what bricks can do while he's still having tea in his own kitchen." "Thank you," I said. "We didn't set it up to ruin anyone's evening. We set it up to ruin the right plan when the wrong people arrived." She smiled that it did. When they left, I locked the door out of habit or satisfaction. I couldn't tell. I made another pot of tea because ceremonies matter. Emily curled up on the sofa, blanket over her knees, the house loosening around her shoulders. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we behave," I said. "Everyone does their job and nobody gets clever. What about ma'am?" she said softly. "A solicitor will speak to a solicitor," I said. "Your mother will not speak to my kettle." She laughed again, real this time. In the morning, the doorbell went at 9:00, purposeful. I opened it to find Priya again, on time, with a man in a gray suit whose card said High Court Enforcement Officer, a constable who carried the air of someone who has prevented 3 arguments before breakfast. "Just for calm," murmured. We walked room by room with the HCEO reading the order, my voice making the introductions. Bathroom, airing cupboard, linen, bedroom, little one guest room now. Mine. We found no one inside. We found a scarf and an almond milk, both of which we left on the kitchen table like apologies. Leonard texted around 11. "Not even a good morning? Just, you didn't need to humiliate me." I typed back. "You did that bit yourself. Then, I love you. Stop trying to be in charge of furniture that isn't yours." He didn't respond. Not with words. He responded with absence, which is how men reply when they haven't yet learned to move back into rooms they broke by noon. Priya had filed the injunction with the police and a copy with the council because Belinda struck her as someone who would try to weaponize a planning complaint to express her feelings. In the afternoon, Hannah phoned. "One more thing," she said. "We'll stick a small brass plaque on the inside of the front door, discreet, to remind future guests of the trust arrangement. People respect brass, or at least they calculate around it." That evening, Emily and I ate beans on toast. Beans. Slightly burnt the way Margaret liked them, toast buttered in the chaotic method of my childhood right to the edges. "You could have warned them," she said through a mouthful. "People who respect a house don't need warnings," I said. "People who don't respect it don't deserve them." She slept in the upstairs spare room, Margaret's old sewing room, because the house wanted a heartbeat up there. I was tired of being told where to put mine. In the morning, a car I recognized pulled up at the end of the drive and idled, the universal symbol for "I've come to be brave and will leave if you make me work for it." Leonard knocked. "Come in," I said, because this house likes to hear that word said, as if it means it. He stood in the hall and looked up the stairs as if they were a test. "I didn't know," he said, "about the trust." "You didn't ask?" I said. He looked older, not because he had learnt something clever, because he had finally remembered a boring truth. Roofs belong to people who write boring things. Down. "I wanted to look after you," he tried, reaching for the old script as if it might forgive him. "By moving me into a cupboard," I said gently. He winced. "Mum would have told me off." "Mum would have put her hands on your cheeks," I said, "and asked why you were using your capable brain to make the world smaller." He nodded, which is how men say sorry when they aren't ready to waste the word. "What happens now?" "You behave," I said. "You apologize to Emily. You apologize to the house. You tell your wife that papers are different from pillows, and she can't fluff them into the shape she likes. You stay away unless invited. You arrange to come on Sundays with the children. You don't bring almond milk." He laughed despite himself, which annoyed him, which helped. "And when we're both ready," I added, "we'll talk about why a man who grew up in this house thought he needed to break into it in order to feel like he belonged." Put his hand on the grandfather clock as if it were the register for visitors and stood like that a long time. "I thought you were going to leave," I said. "I did," I said. "For a walk? For an injunction? For a plan? Then I came back with someone you didn't expect." He nodded again properly this time. "Good." When he left, I sat at the kitchen table where all decent wars end and count their casualties. I wrote a letter for the bread sauce folder because that's where sense lives in this family. "Dear House, thank you for surviving another attempt to be turned into a set. You're not. You're a place. You hold a life. You will hold more when I stop needing you to, but not for a while yet, dear Leonard. Right. Throw your shoulders at something that resists you. Honestly work. Your children's homework. A fence post that needs straightening. Leave other people's steps alone. Dad, 2 days later. There was a party in the village hall, the sort the parish throws whenever it can't think of a reason not to. I went. So did half the neighborhood. People didn't ask. They nodded. Which is how English villages register support. Moira squeezed my elbow. "How did it go?" she asked. "Paper 1, I said. "Good," she said. "I made trifle. Belinda didn't come. Neither did Marissa. Emily did and danced with Nathan to a song that sounded like a toaster drowning. Leonard came and shook the vicar's hand too firmly because he was still learning the right strengths. For grip. He kissed my head on the way out, not because he was forgiven, but because he had decided to move in that direction. To start, we take them, we stack them, we build a house out of them that stays where you put it. I slept that night. Upstairs as I have for 3 decades, in a bed that still knows my name even when it refuses to flatter my back. When I awoke, the lake was doing its impression of a thoughts you can hear. I made coffee. I didn't check the fridge because I know what milk I buy. I took my mug to the threshold and looked at the small brass plaque Hannah's team had, already fixed to the inside of the door. It said, in delightfully tidy serif, 9 Ashdown Bay in Katha, Margaret Vale Trust Life Tenant, G. Vale No. Occupiers without written consent, In smaller letters beneath, St. Catherine's Hospice appreciates your respect. Grinned at that. Margaret would have approved of the manners. There was one more thing to do. At 11 sharp the next day, a van arrived like a punchline. Two women got out in bright-colored fleeces and carried in clipboards in calm. "Good morning, Mr. Vale," said Hannah. "We brought someone else they may not expect." Behind her came 3 nurses from the hospice, here to film a piece for their website about legacy giving and living color. We filmed it on the deck in the weak sun I spoke about. Margaret, about kettles, about the dull business of making sure love looks after people you'll never meet. Somewhere in the middle, my voice did a thing it hadn't done since she died, and I let it because you shouldn't lie in public about the interesting bits. When we finished, Hannah took my hand. "One day," she said, "this house will buy blankets and morphine and the sort of quiet that lets children sit with their mums without anyone asking them to make tea. Today it bought you peace. And it bought my son a lesson," I said. "They're expensive, but they last." That evening, when the sky was the color of old crockery, there was a soft knock, and Emily's face popped round the door. "Mum's furious," she said, "but she'll be fine."
Right.
"Can I bring my laundry round on Tuesday?" "Only if you bring bread," I said. "Bread's not a metaphor," she said, grinning in the exact way her grandmother used to. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." We sat at the table and made lists, sensible ones. We didn't write almond milk. We wrote Sunday. Lunch, 1 p.m., 2 extra plates, door unlocked. We wrote apologies without names and drew a line through it because good ones don't need to be scheduled. We wrote rope, kettle, brass plaque. We closed the notebook. We put the kettle on. We waited for the knock we now wanted to hear. They didn't stop, of course. People like Marissa and Belinda don't believe in no until it arrives wearing a wig and a clerk. The morning after the injunction, Priya texted me a screenshot from the county court portal. As expected, their solicitors had filed an application under TOLATA, the Trusts of Land and Appointment of Trustees Act 1996, seeking a declaration as to beneficial interest and, while they were at it, a Family Law Act occupation order. In the alternative, pleading was a mood board in legalese, vague assertions of family arrangement, detrimental reliance, informal license, tolerly vulnerability, and mutual intention. Somewhere beneath the adjectives lurked the nonsense that they, by mere exertion of presence and future plans, had earned a right to live in the house my wife and I had settled on a charity a decade and a half ago. Priya phoned. "We'll meet." It was 3 things: the trust deed, the land registry restrictions, and the fact that Talata does not magic a beneficial interest out of entitlement, she said. "Bring your best cardigan." Judges like men who look as if they know how to defrost a freezer at the directions hearing. The judge looked exactly like someone who had seen this sort of drama before and forgotten all of it on purpose. District. Judge H peered over her glasses at the skeleton arguments like a woman contemplating whether to move the spoons. She asked 3 questions. 1. Did the respondents contribute funds to the purchase? "No," Priya said. "It was acquired in 1989 by Mr. and Mrs. Vale. The trust was settled in 2009. They've not contributed a penny to capital." 2. Is there any writing evidencing an intention by the trustees to create a beneficial interest in favor of the respondents? "No," Priya said. "Where are written letters, however, expressly stating the opposite? Well, Settler's letter of wishes life interest for Mr. Vale, remainder to St. Catherine's Hospice." 3. Are the respondents named beneficiaries? "No," Priya said, and slid the deed so it exactly faced the judge. Life tenant Mr. Vale, remainderman St. Catherine's Hospice. Duh. The judge turned to Marissa's counsel, who had the look of someone realizing this case had looked prettier in conference. "Anything else?" she asked. Counsel ventured the suggestion that family created equities. The judge made a small noise British benches specialize in, somewhere between a laugh and a cough. "Equity follows the law," she said. "The law here is a trust deed you cannot climb around. You are not beneficiaries. You have no standing to occupy. Occupation orders are not for winning arguments. They're for protection from abuse. I see none. Application dismissed. Costs reserved to the claimant." She looked over her glasses at the 2 of them. And if you attempt to re-enter without consent, that will be trespass. You will not enjoy those consequences. Good day. Left with an order stamped in the right corner, and the sort of relief that tastes like tap water. Outside the court, Belinda hissed, something about humiliation. Priya smiled her silk smile. No, she said. Education. They didn't come back. Not to the house, anyway. But a week later, a glossy invitation landed on my mat, addressed for form to Mr. G. Vale. Summer drinks at Birchwood House. Belinda and Trevor's pile 20 minutes away, celebrating family, friendship, and new beginnings. I laughed out loud and texted Priya a photograph. She replied with 3 words I have come to adore. Shall we go? Don't have the trousers for hostility, I said. You have the cardigan, she said. And we have someone they're not expecting. Hannah arrived at mine the next evening with 2 more in hospice fleeces and a man in a suit who looked allergic to adjectives. This is Michael Arlen, she said. He's head of legacies at St. Catherine's. He has a face that makes people pay attention without trying. Oh, Dan. With them came a woman called Bethany, whose husband Simon had died in the hospice the previous winter 46. A tradesman, 2 kids, humor intact until the end. She'd agreed with that quiet bravery grief bequeaths to ordinary people. Say a few words about what bricks can do when they aren't being used to build someone's self-portrait. We drove in convoy to Birchwood House. It's the sort of home that imagines itself to be on the cover of a map. The drive was lined with lavender that had been told it was tasteful. Guests scattered across a lawn that had never met a stain. You could smell Prosecco and intent. Quartets sawed away at something. Strings think of as sophisticated. Belinda spotted us, did her hostess glide, summoned a smile with more teeth than warmth. George, she said, air kissing the air near my cheek. Do come in. We're so pleased you could make it.
I brought someone you might not.
Expect, I said, stepping aside so Hannah could be seen. Michael. And lastly, Bethany, who wore a dress that announced she'd got dressed to tell the truth. This is Hannah, who looks after legacies at St. Catherine's Hospice, the place that will one day make use of the bricks you took such an interest in. This is Michael, who makes sure the promises get turned into blankets and morphine rather than brochures. And this is Bethany, whose husband died last November, in a bed paid for by people who remember that houses can be generous. You could feel it, the air change. And Trevor's wine glass halted halfway to his mouth. A couple of their friends, the breed who like to be on committees, did a small intake of breath and leaned in because gossip will always fancy itself a public good. Belinda rallied. How
Marvelous,
she said. We do so love too. Support local causes. Your love hadn't shown up in our records, Michael said pleasantly. But perhaps this evening changes that. Trevor attempted a chuckle, rather a bold line of business, walking into people's gardens and reminding them their furniture will outlast them. We don't take furniture, Hannah said. Take pain away. We also take late nights and fear. The furniture stays exactly where it is, unless someone particularly asks us to get rid. She smiled in a way that had nothing to do with lavender. Don't worry, Mr. Westcott. We don't do doorstep wills. Bethany stood on no one's invitation, began to speak. Softly, the quartet faltered and willingly retreated to the marquee. To practice being unnecessary, people turned. The dangerous thing about truth is that it has acoustics. My Simon died at St. Catherine's, she said. They made room for us when there was none at home. They fed him when I couldn't afford to pay attention to anything but the way he breathed. They gave our boys a table and chairs and told them they could talk or play cards or count tiles. Nobody minded. They let us be untidy. When it was time to go, we all knew. And they made soup, which doesn't sound like death. And that is the kindest thing anyone can do for a family. She gestured towards me. George's house is going to pay for a nurse to make soup when someone else forgets how. She looked at Belinda without malice. I don't know what your house pays. 4. Belinda's face, the one that had been trained for functions and photographs, did a trick I'd never seen. It told the truth, spasm, then a narrowing. And then, to her credit, a comprehension that looked almost like an apology. She put down her glass and clapped. One of those slow, deliberate claps that you can't do ironically if you hope to keep your friends. People joined because nobody had told them not to. Some were crying, the low, tidy British kind. Trevor stared. At his shoes, Leonard was there. I hadn't noticed him at the back, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on the lawn. He looked at me, and the look said all sorts of things at once. Chief among them, thank you for uninviting me from becoming the sort of man who thinks parties are battles and houses are loot. Marissa did not clap. She did a little jaw movement. Plenty of women learn when the world refuses to be arranged. When the murmurs quietened, she tried a last reflex. Well, she said, brittle light, that was. Inspiring. Let's not get morbid. Who wants a top up? Bethany smiled at her in a way no one had ever smiled at Marissa before, as if she were a child who'd wandered into a maths class with a paint set. Death isn't morbid, she said. It's punctual. Kindness is optional. You should try it. I took a tray of sausage rolls from a man who looked grateful to be given a job and did a circuit of the lawn. People thanked me for nothing I'd done. They asked me where to sign a form. Michael wandered near the trestle table with a sheet of paper-headed pledge, and as people scrawled their unsteady names, he told them, in practical terms, what their money would do. That's the trick most charities get wrong. They try to sell you metaphors. People want to buy naps, clean sheets, cups of tea, petrol money for a nurse in the middle of the night. We didn't take checks. We took names and let them arrive. At the right rooms later, by the sober light of kitchens, when we left, Priya squeezed my arm. Enjoy yourself, she murmured. Immensely, I said. It's nice to attend a party where the point came. We didn't hear from Marissa for a fortnight. Then her solicitor wrote to Priya, attempting a last flank not to me, but to the charity. A without prejudice proposal that recognized the trust, but requested the trustees to grant a license for family occupancy in the spirit of the deceased's memory. I read it twice and laughed on the second reading. Margaret would have laughed the same way. Hannah drafted the reply with a fountain pen that had seen wars. The trustees thank you for your letter. They are unable to consider it. The trust deed gives them no power to grant such a license even if they wished. It also offends the purposes of the trust, which are charitable. We wish you a pleasant autumn. She copied it to Priya and to me. Below, a handwritten line, soup and morphine, not scented candles. It ended there. How do such things ever end? Not with a bang. With paper and a room being used for the right thing. Sundays went back to Sunday. Leonard came with the children. He turned up empty-handed apart from stories, and the discipline of standing at the sink without waiting to be asked. Marissa sent Emily, sometimes Nathan, seldom herself. In November she came once. She didn't bring almond milk. She brought a bouquet that looked expensive and apologized for itself by shedding calmly on the table. She said very little. At the end, she stood by the grandfather clock, touched the casing and said, "This is a nice house." It was both truce and surrender. I accepted both and only asked one thing. No parties, I said. She nodded. You'll be wanting the other party, the one that had nothing to do with lavender and everything to do with soup. The one in our village hall with the varnished parquet and the table that shifts when it feels petty. I called it Margaret's. Evening, a fundraiser for St. Catherine's hosted by a man who found a way to put his love for a woman in a trust deed. The hospice brought their piano player who knows 2 tunes and 17 ways to make them look new. Mrs. Patel from the charity shop ran a raffle with the ferocity of a magistrate. Moira bullied the urn into working. Leonard came early and stuck up chairs with that satisfying thud chairs make when they are facing the right way. Emily ran the door and learned how to smile without letting anyone leave handsy, Nathan reluctantly. Magnificently managed the AV and glowed at the mastery of the HDMI input, like boys have done since screens were invented. Trevor and Belinda did not attend. Marissa sent a donation in cash that smelt of dignity, trying on a new dress. Just before, the bit where people need someone to hang the room together, I brought out the person they never expected to see. Not a solicitor this time, not a hospice head, not even a judge. I brought out Margaret, which is to say, I played a recording we'd made the year before she died. At Miriam's insistence, a legacy message, the lawyer had said gently. For the moments that ambushed grief, Margaret's voice filled the hall, scratchy, firm, funny. She said the things she always said: make tea before you decide. Don't give your ladder to men who say, obviously, pay your bills and your debts, in that order. And then she said, a thing I hadn't heard her say since the day we signed the deed. Bricks aren't love. Bricks can hold it, though, if you build them into a promise. The room was so quiet you could hear the plaque at the back door, hoping not to be needed yet. People cried. Of course they did, cried the way Englishmen are allowed to if we don't make a fuss, sitting down, looking at our hands, letting it go where it chooses. When the lights came up, Hannah announced the total in a voice that made numbers cuddle enough to fund 3 months of night nurse shifts. We clapped. We clapped for Margaret, and for paper, and for the dull miracle of a village that had learned to be useful to itself. Afterwards, outside under the bad light where smokers learn to repent, Leonard hugged me, not the tentative press of custom. A proper hug. I was proud, he said. You were useful, I said. That's better. We went back to the house. He stood at the brass plaque and read it aloud like a liturgy. Didn't say sorry again. He didn't need to, he said. At the sink, Dad, what do you need? Which is the sentence that mends furniture. I need you to get the ladder, I said. The gutter wants a word. He laughed. We did the gutter. We didn't fall. He lasted on the rungs for 4 minutes longer than I did. I didn't tell him. Later, we sat with tea. He asked about the trust again in proper nouns. I laid it all out, the RX1 restriction, the form, the letter of wishes, the life interest, the hospice. He listened without correcting me. Will you ever move out? He asked. When I can't see where the rope is, I said. And when I'd need someone else to find the kettle. He nodded. I'll come when you call. Don't wait for me to call, I said. Sunday is a phone call. Use the door. Months passed into the right kind of weather. Emily graduated. Nathan learned that phones can be used for calling. Your grandfather about football fixtures. Marissa found herself comfortable with the version of respect that is short, polite, and not interested in applause. Trevor mended the thing he'd broken with the grandfather clock, the apology. He owes a piece of furniture will be a running joke at parish meetings long after I'm gone. Belinda, to my faint surprise, sent a check to St. Catherine's the following year with a note, in thanks for an evening where I was reminded that taste is not the same as kindness. People can learn. So can rooms. One last coda, because life loves them. A summer later, the Ashdown Lake Residents Association held its annual regatta, which is a grand word for 6 canoes and a barbecue. Trevor and Belinda announced a private celebration at Birchwood afterwards to honor family. Moira texted me an eye roll. I took a nap and didn't attend, but I did send someone they weren't expecting. Hannah went, dressed as a human being rather than a uniform. When with her was a lad named Sam, whose mom had died in the hospice in April. He's 15.
Oh.
All elbows and shoulders, and has a smile lodged in his face like a small sun. He thanked Belinda for letting us borrow your lawn, and then handed her a photograph of his mom holding the hand of the nurse, whose salary the regatta had helped to pay. No speeches, no adjectives. Belinda sat down on a deck chair and for a very long time did not speak. That is the sort of party I approve of, one that teaches a room how to sit with its own air. If you need the lesson spelled out, it is this. There will be people who try to turn your house into a stage for their plans, versus them, paper, patience. A solicitor who knows where the verbs go. A charity with a decent fleece, and a village that respects a brass plaque. Against them, you do not need rage. You need a letter in the bread sauce folder that starts. Dear house, and another to a son that ends. Throw your shoulders at something that resists you honestly. And if ever again the gravel crunches and suitcases land on my floor, I will do exactly what I did this time. I will set down my coffee, keep my face still, and, if I must, arrive at someone's party with someone they never expected. Not to humiliate. To educate. To remind everyone that bricks are useful when they hold soup. The house sleeps well these nights. It knows who it belongs to. So do I. And on Sundays, when Leonard comes up the path, Empty-handed except for stories, I open the door and say the word, "This house was built to here. Come in." Then I take his coat, put the kettle on, and point to the ladder, because love in this family is a gutter that needs doing together before the rain. Winter came in with a proper sulk and a long memory. The lake took on that heavy pewter look that tells you it is not interested in your metaphors. The gutters tried to negotiate and failed. The parish WhatsApp, which Amelia still managed like a librarian who has seen worse, lit up with polite panic. Drains, branches, anyone got sandbags. I did the thing men like me are allowed when they've decided to be useful instead of clever. Put on the old coat, slung the coil of rope over my shoulder because it amuses the weather, and walked the line where the water thinks it might as well. Tried at number 13, an old lad who refuses to wear socks in his slippers had misread his lawn. It attempted to leave. At the gap in the hedge, a boy tried to take a photo and discovered he had ankles. 2 doors down, a car named itself a boat and then changed its mind. I tied off the rope to the lamppost the council grudgingly put in after. A petition that made the clerk frown, threw the loop across the path, and did a very slow, very undramatic chain of hands until the last woman stepped through the shallow stubbornness and laughed. Rowena turned up, hair damp, eyes taking attendance, and put her shoulder to a fence until it decided to be bored again. Charity doesn't always need checks. Sometimes it needs knees. Afterwards, back in my kitchen, Leonard stood by the radiator and steamed. "That was almost fun," he said, surprised. "Almost fun is the correct amount for disasters," I said. "The rest should be boring." Emily came round in wellies that matched nothing and borrowed the kettle as if steam were a family. Recipe. Nathan, who has finally learned that boredom beats fireworks, took photographs on the decent camera his mother gave him so he'd stop making the world into a rectangle on a screen. He printed one for the notice board. The rope, like a lazy smile across the path, people going home without applause. The day after the flood, Leonard came to me with a document, did not expect to see in his hands, and was briefly scarier than any cloud. A housing association application. Not for himself, but for a lad at the warehouse satin. Couch surfing between cousins and temptations. A good pair of hands, and the sort of heat in the eyes that means nobody has yet told me I'm allowed not to be angry. Had filled in the bits the boy found frightening, added a letter that did not dress itself as a speech, stood nervously in my kitchen like a person about to ask me to sign his homework. "Will you?" "Read it," he said. He had written like an adult. Short sentences, fewer adverbs than history, verbs that offered to help rather than rescue. He's never missed a shift, he'd put. He listens the second time, if the first turns him into a kettle. I suggested one alteration: remove the generous lie about no incidents. Replace with the smaller truth about one incident that taught him to apologize without excuses. He nodded. "You've learned how to put nouns where they go?" I said. "They'll probably be grateful before they're kind, but grateful counts." A week later, the lad came to the door with a letter, too shy to hand it over, as if legal paper might bite an old man. He did the new British thing of saying thanks by looking at his shoes. "We're all right," he said, because he tried. Leonard stood on the path and looked at me in that way that makes a father forgive himself for taking too long. "Yeah. Felt tidy," he said. "It's doing the right thing without anybody noticing. That's how roofs stay up," I said. "No one applauds, and you get to be warm anyway." We had our frictions. Of course we did. Humans insist. Marissa tried one last legal angle in Sprina, letter dressed up as concern, suggesting social services might wish to satisfy themselves that an elderly gentleman living alone in a large property was not at risk. Priya dealt with it by doing what good solicitors do, inviting the right people at the right time with the right paperwork. A safeguarding officer came round on a Tuesday at 10. Emily made tea. We sat at the table, the only real courtroom any house needs, and I gave him precisely what the job asks for: truth without performance. I handed him the letter of wishes, the durable power of attorney Miriam had arranged, the life interest deed, a printout of the injunction, a folder labeled rope and kettle policy, because I had enjoyed myself too much. He laughed in the way. "Professionals aren't supposed to, you appear," he said dryly. to have more safeguards than my office. His report went out that afternoon with the kind of sentence that makes bad ideas tired. Mr. Vale is not at risk. He is at home. That summer, the hospice invited Leonard and me to tour the ward our fundraiser had kept lit. We walked the corridor in the quiet that nurses train. Hannah showed us a plaque near the day room the Margaret Vale Knights funded. By the Ashdown community? It's not much, she said, but it's a sentence that keeps people from having to be brave for 12 hours alone. Later, in the car park, Leonard leaned against the bonnet and looked at the sky the way a man does when rain is deciding. I get it, he said. The house, the trust, the soup. It felt like theft before. It doesn't now. It felt like not being chosen, I said gently. It never was that. It was choosing strangers first because they need the bricks in ways you don't. He nodded, which is how men accept the kind of love that asks nothing thrilling of them, only decency. Marissa shifted too, slowly at first, then in the way of people who choose a new script because the old one has no scenes left. She came too. Sunday luncheon didn't criticize the way I peel carrots. She complimented Emily without trying to own her. She told me she was sorry in the currency wives understand. She turned up with a dish that worked. She once whispered, I didn't know how to organize a life that didn't admire me. And the sentence made me want to forgive everything. I didn't, not that day. I poured her tea. Admiration is a poor fuel. Belinda surprised everyone, and no one by joining the hospice's second-hand furniture shop as a volunteer. The first time I walked in and found her measuring a dresser with a tape she'd never used to do anything more helpful before, I did the British thing, said nothing, and bought a chair. She didn't apologize. She matched a man with a coffee table he'd been hoping for. That's how countries repair themselves. We did one more thing with the trust deed. Because Miriam had taught me to do the legal version of tidying before Storm added a successor life interest if I ever lacked capacity. Not for Leonard, he doesn't need bricks. He needs Sundays, but for something better. Right to reside for 6 months for a hospice nurse between tenancies, Anna cried. We could house Rosie between placements, she said. She's been commuting from Hastings at midnight. That line cost me nothing but a sentence. It will buy someone sleep. Time is an honest bookkeeper. It reminded me I had knees, then forgot to remind them. I fell and didn't break anything one Wednesday, which felt like a miracle until Friday when I did. Hip, curtains, ambulance, the waiting room that smells of wrong biscuits. They fixed me with the calm competence of a country that still knows how to put metal where bone argues. Rowena sat with me for an hour before theater and told me about a ridiculous new fraud involving text messages that pretend to be parks fines. We're window dressing for thieves, she said. That's my TED Talk. Then she tightened her ponytail, took my hand, and said, You're allowed to ask for rescue this once. I didn't, but I let her stand there until the doors swallowed me. I rehoused myself in my upstairs bed as soon as I could because concessions are never as temporary as healthy men suppose. Leonard moved the throw rug he hates and didn't say why. Brought me, instead of flowers, a list of the things he could do in 20 minutes that would make the house like itself. You gave me useful, he said. You get useful back. Started writing goodbye letters, not because I was leaving, but because I have learnt the hard way that if you want anything done properly, you do it before any committee cosmic or civic gets a look in. I wrote to Amelia, thanking her for teaching me to trust digital library accounts with paper backups. I wrote to Rowena thanking her for never pretending that bravery is loud. Right to Priya. Simply, you put the verbs in the right places. Then I wrote to Leonard with a fountain pen my father left me. Son, there is nothing in my will for you that you don't already have on Sunday. You will be asked for the rest of your life to prove you are good. You cannot. You can only be the man who turns up with a ladder first and a line afterwards do. Not let anyone clear this house as if it were the end of an argument. Let it be the beginning of someone else's kitchen. Feed my rope to the bin. Keep the kettle your Fadari. Put them in the bread sauce folder under the recipe for the version Margaret wrote in 1991 Simmer Milk. Onion, bay, stale crumbs, patience, and then it happened one morning, quietly. The house found the right temperature, the lake pretended to be dull, and my body decided it liked the section of the manual labeled off. I didn't get a rehearsal text. I got the thing itself. Moment where the best version of your life asks politely for the last chore. I did it in the hospice, not at home, because people who love kettles know when to borrow one. They put soup where there should have been drama. A nurse called Rosie. Yes, that one adjusted a blanket with the authority of a human worth 10 plaques. I muttered something offensive about Arsenal. Someone laughed with the decency good death deserves. Then, as Helen would write it, I left the room as I found it. Everything after this paragraph I didn't write. Leonard did, and he wrote it well enough that I'm happy to share the floor. I didn't know what silence was until the morning the phone rang at 5 and used our names without harming them. They said he'd gone with one of his small jokes on his mouth. I said thank you to a woman who has been taught to receive that word as if people mean it. He drove. Amelia packed the bag because everything she owns knows what to do. They'd moved him to a room where the clock had decided to be generous. The mug from Homeworld's best gaffer sat on the side. Someone had found bread sauce in the fridge and warmed it because they are just that sort of people. I put my hand on his forehead the way he used to check if I was making a mountain. He looked 50. But then he always did when he decided to. Hannah came and hugged me like someone who had allowed herself that promotion. Priya arrived with the right sort of envelope. Rowena turned up with coffee that made the room remember the outside world. Amelia stood and held the window open a crack so the weather could take part. We did not view houses that morning. We viewed. A life had marked it down as satisfactory with notes. The hospice nurse asked if we wanted to keep the rope. We laughed because my father is ridiculous beyond policy. Bennett, Amelia said, we're more of a kettle family. The house didn't fight. It knew its job. Priya sent the necessary emails. The former restriction did its little flare. The RX-1 did its teeth. The trustee resolution did its marching, and the charity's procedure, which reads like boredom and is therefore perfect, began to turn love into soup. We did what a family does. When the man who taught you to turn up has made it unnecessary, we told the village we made sandwiches. We let other people speak. In the eulogy, I didn't make a speech. I read his letter and borrowed the sentences he would have used if he'd been alive and I'd been the one playing the bloody piano. The day we gave the keys to St. Catherine's was the day I understood everything he'd done. We stood on the step with Hannah and a small box for the spare, and I said the word he liked to hear in that doorway. Come in, she did, looked at the brass plaque. She ran her hand over the door, casing the way he used to. She didn't cry. I did. Amelia took a photograph not of us, but of the kettle on the counter, the same old thing with its small burn on the base where Dad had once tried to make it be younger than it could. We spent a week inside memories. I found the bread sauce folder. I found his last letter to me and cried properly because trifles were not available. I found one addressed to Emily that began Bring Your Laundry, and one to Nathan that said, Phones aren't rectangles. They're ropes. Use them to pull someone nearer when they're drifting. He had even written to Marissa and Belinda. He hadn't scolded. He had thanked them for learning late and well and asked them to leave the house alone long enough too. Do the job it had been built for next. They did. The charity decided to sell the house. That's what trust deeds do when they like soup better than floors. They kept the brass plaque. They'll put it in a little display by the nurse's station. They hired an auctioneer who had the good sense to do the photographs without lying. The neighbors came round in those final days with Tupperware and elbows, took down the bread sauce folder and copied the recipes and the letters and left. The boring administrative things in the envelope labeled Estate Hannah. On the last evening, Emily and I sat on the dock with our feet an inch above water. She, because she is wise. Me, because I am terrified properly. Nathan took a photograph. That will ruin him when he's old. Amelia wrote Good House quietly on the estate agent's sheet because someone needed to use the right words. Priya came and checked that the only people who needed to cry were allowed to. Rowena Tartan's scarf, ponytail, sensible shoes stood in the kitchen and did a last check with the eye of an officer, a friend, a woman who turns up. It's tidy, she said. He'll be furious. He wanted drama. He'll live, Amelia said, and we all laughed. which is a good way to finish a sentence like that. At the hospice, some months later, a little plaque under the photograph. They chose of Margaret and Dad reads, "The Margaret and George Vale ROM soup and morphine fund paid. For by bricks that behave themselves, on Boxing Day we held the first fundraiser without the man who liked to pretend he didn't believe in parties. We did rope and kettle as usual. Mrs. Patel ran the raffle. Moira bullied the urn. Amelia made everyone sit for a story about a man who liked bread. I spoke last and shortest. Help, not rescue, I said. Rope by the door, kettle on. Bread is not a metaphor. People clapped because they knew too. I left before anyone could try and say legacy. I hate that word unless it's followed by folder. If you came here for revenge, I'm sorry. He taught me something better. Paper. Patience. Soup. A village. A boy learning to be a father by arriving. A solicitor who knows where to put verbs. A police officer who tells you to leave a room so you can come back into a life. A house that was never a stage and never a prize. Only a place to sit and be dull and alive. And when the party arrived, he showed up with someone nobody expected, the person who turns houses into blankets. Their faces turned pale. Good. Everyone needed the blood for something else. Asterisk, the house sold in a way Dad would have approved of without choreography. No drones. No staged lifestyle nonsense. A young couple with a shy baby and a dog that looked like diplomacy. Put in a clean offer after the first viewing and wrote a short letter we didn't need, but which made everyone behave. Better. We promised to keep the kitchen warm. Hannah accepted on behalf of the trust. Priya checked all the dull business that keeps the world civil searches, inquiries. That strange little dance with the land registry where you pretend to remember the exact date your drains were born and 6 weeks later, we handed the keys to people who looked like they'd learned the value of floors. On completion day, I walked through the quiet rooms one last time. Not to say goodbye to theatrical, but to check the light switches, which seems to be the way I do grief. Amelia took a picture in the hallway that showed nothing except the way a house can look dignified when it's done its job. We left the bread sauce folders copies in a plain envelope with a note that said, "Thank you for buying the room." Where our family practiced being decent. At the hospice, the check went into an account that doesn't know how to be vain. They didn't clap. They said good and right, and we can extend nights into next March, and then went back to work. A week later, Hannah sent a photograph of a whiteboard in the nurse's office, Margaret and George. Nights covered to the 31st of March. Soup fund healthy. People keep making the mistake of thinking that legacy is about plaques. It's the whiteboard. Marissa tried being furious for another month and then got bored of herself, which is the bravest thing I've seen her do. She asked if she could come to the hospice shop just for an hour, then stayed for and went home talking about the dignity of a well-priced teapot. Belinda turned up in a fleece and a face less lacquered than anyone thought possible. She learned the stamp, the till, the art of telling a man of 40 that no. That dresser isn't solid oak, and yes, he may have a tenner off if he promises to actually put books on it. Once alone at the counter, she told Bethany softly that she hadn't known what to do with all her free time when admiration stopped paying dividends. Soup, Bethany said. You always need soup. Trevor apologized to the grandfather clock his own, who bought it at auction because apparently we are now filtered by fate to care for time with a tiny bow that made Marissa laugh into her sleeve. He now polishes it like a man who once misread a room and is determined to read at least one object correctly for the rest of his life. Priya retired a year later. Her leaving due was held in one of those function rooms that smell of dust and optimism. I wrote in her card, "You put the verbs in the right places." She appealed it, then accepted. Her successor, a man young enough to think fountain pens are a flex, came to our kitchen and passed the test in 10 minutes by not saying legacy unless it was followed by folder. Rowena was promoted again. The new rank looked heavy on her lanyard and light in her eyes. She still turned up for tea the way good officers turn up for paperwork at 3 a.m, on time. Unsentimental, properly tired. Once she arrived with a bruise only fate gives you stares, not fist sand a grin she'd borrowed from 21. We closed a case. she said properly. No fireworks, restitution. The sort of ending that tastes of paperwork. We toasted with mugs that had seen worse. By then, Sundays had resettled themselves without arguing. Emily would come with laundry and jabs at Nathan's photography, which had tipped from hobby to habit. He sells prints at the farmer's market. People buy pictures of the lake like they're buying a guarantee the light will return. Nate ran the rota for potatoes with the same grace she allocates shelves. We have a standing argument about carrots, which Dad would have loved. We don't glaze them. We steam them like adults. Occasionally, Marissa comes quieter than before. We don't talk about the house. It talks for us. The day the hospice opened the renovated night bay, they asked us to come see so we could get our crying done before it was needed by anybody who deserved it. The nurse who was on at 8 p.m. stood by the trolley of blankets like a captain, ready for weather, small brass strip under the clock because someone at the hospice knows how to be tidy read. Nights made possible by Margaret and George. A family came through the door with faces like rooms you don't open unless you must. Nobody looked at the brass. I was right. I took up running errands to the hospice not to be noble but to be useful. I am a man who drives to the cash and carry and buys biscuits. Once in the staff room, an honest biscuit and a dishonest one contested plate space. I left without interfering because I have learned at last when to let a room decide on its own heroes. On the way out, a nurse slipped me a note to pass to. Hannah, T levels critical. I made it look like procurement rather than love. We still did the workshops. Rope and kettle has now been inflicted on 4 parishes and 1 Rotary Club. Amelia added a piece on how to talk to your parents. About scams without making them feel like you think they're adorable and stupid. A man in a tweed jacket asked whether 159 works from landlines. Usually, Rowena said. But if you don't trust it, hang up, make tea, and walk to your bank in daylight. Mrs. Dunn now does an impression of a courier so good. We're petitioning for BOFT. Marissa filed one last thing, a request to clarify the safeguarding conclusions. The officer came again, drank better tea, admired the plaque at the hospice door, and wrote a sentence I will have tattooed on my fridge. The situation is not risk. The situation is boundaries that shut it. Belinda brought a tray of cups to the kitchen that afternoon and said, I was exhausting, wasn't I? And I said, we all are when we're bored. And she laughed for the first time without noticing her face. Then came the day we all pretended not to be anxious about, the auction of the house contents that weren't ours. The hospice retained Hannah's favorite silver picture frame. Everything else had sprigs of paper tied to it. People from the village bought chairs they'd sat in long enough to feel like tenants. The man who won the bread bin cried because it carried the small steam of arguments finished amicably. At the end, a woman in a cardigan with a will of its own held up Dad's coil of rope. We can't, she said. We'll get into trouble. We did the only sensible thing. We donated it to the Scouts because nothing heals a story like knots. 4 months later, the hospice wrote. First 12 weeks funded. A family room to be painted, a kettle to be replaced, a storage cupboard to be built. They attached a photograph. On the shelf above the new kettle, someone Hannah had put a recipe card in a clip. Bread sauce. Margaret's handwriting. Copied exact bay leaf underlined in the way her pen insisted on style. I found myself seated abruptly. Amelia had anticipated it and placed tea in my hand at the exact angle that prevents spilling. Gruffness. Life wasn't all competence and soup. On a Wednesday, I picked a fight with the council about bin lids and lost in a manner so complete it took 2 hours to tell the story without people putting heads on kitchen tables. On a Thursday, Emily came round with a face she'd reserved for exams and boyfriends, both expired. I didn't get it, she said, meaning the job. I said the sentence I stole from Dad. Stay again. Ask outside the room. She did. They rang. She starts on Monday. Nathan sold a book of photographs of the lake and gave half the proceeds to the hospice without telling anyone. He expected applause. He got lasagna, which is how this family has learned to respond when people get something. Right? That isn't unusual enough for applause. We framed one of his prints for the nurses' corridors, like an idea not ready yet. A junior doctor wrote good on a post-it and stuck it to the frame. Nobody removed it. There's a tidiness to grief when you let it be boring. On Dad's birthday, we didn't go to the lake and throw flowers. We boiled the kettle and made bread sauce to sit under a roast chicken that was lukewarm, because someone rang the doorbell and we let the neighborhood in. After, I read the last letter he wrote to me aloud, not because anyone needed to hear it, because words need to be broken in. "Throw your shoulders at something that resists you honestly," I quoted. And Emily snorted and pushed Nathan towards the dishwasher. "Do your shoulders at that," she said. They surprised me one evening, the family, the neighbors. The hospice lot with a small plaque at the new family kitchen. Aftercare. It said in a font that refuses to be posh. Paid for by Dull and Alive. That's Amelia's mischief, and I recognize it in any room. We ate soup that had no right to be as good as it was. Belinda made bread. I refused to become a metaphor and then finished 3 slices. The only person who never stopped being slightly ridiculous about us was Trevor. He remains convinced that if the clock is polished, nobody dies. I didn't argue. He comes on Tuesdays, moves it 1 inch to the left to offend physics, and then puts it back. Once leaving, he gripped my shoulder and said quietly, as if bribing a boarder, "You did right."
That's as much as some men are permitted to say.
It filled a shelf in me I hadn't noticed was empty. We had one last party to attend with. Someone they'd never expect her idea. Not theirs. It was the Birchwood summer again. Belinda's lawn, lavender, strings attempting Vivaldi like people forcing cheerfulness on a thick day. This time we arrived with someone not in hospice fleeces or legal black. We came with the family from number 11, the Oshodis, who had nursed Grandpa Oshodi at St. Catherine's the month before. He had been a bus driver for 30 years. And a poet in the way people are when they have to speak to cities. His widow, Funmi, carries laughter that understands pain. Their boy, Femi, 14, had done the door at our fundraiser with gravitas. They didn't know Belinda. They knew. Soup. We walked on. Belinda, now the sort of person who knows how to move chairs before she sits, spotted us and didn't feign surprise. "We brought friends," Amelia said. "They paid for 2 nights of morphine with their raffle. We thought it would please you to meet them." It did. They told Belinda a story about the nurse who had taught them how to sit by themselves for 20 minutes at 3 a.m. They passed around a phone with a photograph of Grandpa Oshodi's hands calloused, resting. Belinda cried and didn't pretend she wasn't. I thought my house was the point. She said later to me with a freedom she would have been allergic to a year ago. "It's not, is it?" "No," I said. "It's a room you use to teach yourself to leave." We left when the strings tried to do something unforgivable to a Beatles tune. On the way out, Nathan took a photograph of the light falling in the S. Place the lavender had given up being fashionable and returned to being overgrown. It's his best one. On the back he wrote, for himself, "There are the parties you throw, and the parties you attend, and the parties where you show up with someone they didn't expect because the room needs to learn itself again." I send Rowena the occasional stupid text, "Stand up, leave now, bins are out," and she responds with a photograph of an arrest warrant that reads like poetry if you've been lied to for too long. We have learnt each other's versions of rescue. Sometimes she uses mine. Once at 2 a.m, the phone buzzed and her message said, "Leave the bed. Open the door, stand outside, don't ask." I did. A minute later, the chill lapped me awake while the fire brigade eased round the corner. Tires confident, lights low, voices carrying authority so kind it sounds like a lullaby. Someone up the street had fallen asleep on a hob. The rope stayed on its hook. The kettle clicked. Everybody behaved. There is no ending. There is soup and legal paper and a lake that keeps its opinions hooked in the weeds until you ask politely. There are Sunday lunches and brass plaques and boys who learn to straighten fence posts before they ask for a story. There is a solicitor in a cardigan who keeps verbs in the right places, a police officer who texts when she has to and arrives when she can, a librarian who runs a village like a quiet army, a charity that converts bricks into blanket hours, and there is a house occupied by people whose baby is now shouting her way around the kitchen where our mugs used to live, where a plaque by the door quietly thanks strangers. I went back once, with permission and cake. We stood in the hall and I touched the doorframe where Dad used to tap his knuckles to test memory. It's different, the woman said apologetically. Good, I said. Houses should be. Will the rules stay? She asked what the rules were. I told her. Oh, not rescue rope by the door. Kettle on. Bread is not a metaphor. And if anyone shows up with a party and scented candles, introduce them to someone they did not expect to meet. The person who can tell a room what bricks are actually for, she laughed. The baby stole a biscuit. The dog forgave me for existing. I went home to a sundae that had saved me more than once and put the kettle on because tea insists, and I have learned to obey the right things.